In this video, we're going to tackle the setup and configuration of the firewall on our Synology NAS. However, because we've based the configuration of our firewall on work that we've previously done to our NAS, and because your NAS may not be configured in exactly the same way, your configuration might need to be slightly different. When data has to travel through a network, it is first categorized and assigned a number. For example, any data relating to a web page will be tagged with either 80 or, if it needs to be secured, 442. While these numbers are used to help direct data to a service on a computer or our NAS, they're also used by any firewalls that our data has to travel through. On our firewall, we have something called ports, which are also tagged with a number. So using our example, any data tagged with 80 will be sent to port 80 on our firewall. However, as a port could be either open or closed, if a port is open, the data tagged with the port number will be able to pass through. However, if a port is closed, that data will be blocked. While we have oversimplified what a firewall does, and there are firewall types that can do much more, at its core, a firewall is just basically a way to manage and control what data is allowed into and out of a device or network. So while a firewall is an important part of our home network security systems, it's just one layer of security. So we should also be implementing other basic security measures like antivirus and anti-malware software, keeping operating systems up to date, and installing security patches in a timely fashion. At the moment, the router on our home network is providing firewall protection for everything on our network, including our Synology NAS. Which means that, for now, only specific types of data from the internet will be allowed onto our home network, with most data types generated from within our home network being allowed out. While this basic firewall setup is perfectly fine to use, there is a danger that if a device on our home network is compromised, that device could then be used to compromise our NAS. This is because our NAS is just a series of programs running together to give us services like file sharing or video streaming. However, as there's always a chance that any of the programs running on our NAS will have a vulnerability that could be exploited, we try and minimize any risk by using a firewall to only allow specific services on our NAS to send and receive data. Let's start by checking to see if any ports are open on the firewall to our home network. We can do this by using a web tool called Shields Up. If we type grc.com into the address bar of our browser, then on the home page we click on Shields Up. After selecting Proceed, we're shown the options to test our router's firewall. While we do have a number of different test options, we're going to choose All Service Ports. Shields Up will now check the first 1056 ports on our firewall to see if any ports are open, closed or stealthed. While Shields Up will recommend that all service ports that it tests are stealthed. Don't get hung up on the word, as all stealth means is that your firewall is not responding to pings. Instead, as a home user who is not currently running any remote access services or hosting a website, Shields Up should be reporting that your router's firewall ports are either closed or set to stealth. Before we start to configure the firewall on our NAS, it's a good idea to try and identify what services it is currently running. Not only will this help to ensure that we work in a systematic way, it will also help to solidify in our minds what services we think we are running on our NAS. Let's sign into DSM7 Manager using our administrator's credentials. Now from within DSM, let's load the control panel. Within Control Panel, under the heading Connectivity, we first need to select the option Security. Next, by clicking Firewall, we will find that under the General heading, we have an option to enable our firewall. When we click this option, the option Enable Firewall Notifications will also become active. As firewall notifications will be useful going forward, we're going to leave this option ticked. While we have now enabled our firewall, because we have not yet configured it with any rules to follow, it is not doing very much. So we now need to either edit the current firewall profile or create a new one. Under the heading Firewall Profile, there is a drop-down menu that allows us to manage any firewall profiles created on our NAS. So we have the option to create a custom profile, edit the current default profile, and an option to manage our firewall profiles. For this example, we're simply going to edit the default profile. So with default selected, if we click Edit Rules, we are presented with a screen showing us the firewall rules currently configured on the default profile. The rules for our firewall work on the principle of a listed priority, so the rules at the top of the list will always be implemented first and will override any rules that follow it. As it's very easy to make a mistake and create a rule that will lock you out of your NAS, we're going to start by creating two rules, the one that locks you out of your NAS and the rule that will allow us to access DSM7 Manager. If we select Create, we are presented with the Create Firewall Rules window. Because the first rule that we need to create will block all traffic coming into our NAS, we're going to leave Ports Set to All, which means that this rule will affect all ports on our firewall. For the source IP, once again we need to select All, which will mean that our NAS will not accept data traffic from any network. Finally, for action, we need to choose Deny, which will close all ports on our firewall. When we click OK, our first rule is set, however it has not yet been implemented. So if we were to leave our default profile with just this rule, we would lock ourselves out of our NAS and make our NAS unusable because this rule will not allow any data in or out from any source. This means that we now need to create additional firewall rules that will open specific ports on our NAS to allow only specific data types to have access to our NAS. Let's create a new rule that will allow us to access DSM7 Manager. First, we need to identify the port that we want to open. While this can be done by selecting Custom and manually adding the port number for the DSM, to make life easier, we're going to use Select from a list of built-in applications. After choosing Select, we are presented with a list of built-in applications along with their port numbers. If we scroll through this list, we need to locate the application starting with the title Management UI, which uses port numbers 5000 and 5001. We now need to tick both listed Management UI applications as they make reference to the HTTP and HTTPS ports that DSM7 Manager uses. After clicking OK, we need to check the settings for source IP. To ensure that we don't lock ourselves out of our NAS, we're going to leave source IP on all. Finally, for action, as we need ports 5000 and 5001 to both be open, we're going to leave this setting on Allow. When we click OK, a new rule is added to our default firewall profile. However, because our new rule is below the rule that blocks all ports, the Block All Port rule takes precedent, which means that all ports on our NAS will remain blocked. In order to correct this, we simply need to move our Management UI rule so that it is above our Block All rule. When we click OK, our new rules are added to our profile. We now need to select Apply to enable the firewall and our new rules. Let's sign out of DSM7 Manager and test that everything is working as it should be. In order to quickly test that our firewall is working, we can use a computer to run a terminal command. On macOS, if we search for and open a terminal window, and then type nc space dash zv, the IP address of our NAS, followed by another space, then the port number for DSM7 Manager. When we press enter on our keyboard, we should receive a response that it has succeeded. If we run the same command again but change the port number to the one used by DStation Manager for its SSL connection, once again we receive a response that it has succeeded. However, if we once again use the same command, but this time test a port that we think to be closed, eventually we will receive a report confirming that this port is closed. In Windows, if we search for and open a terminal window, then at the command prompt we type test-net connection space the IP address of our NAS space dash port followed by the port number for DStation Manager. When we press enter on our keyboard, we should receive a report stating that port 5000 is open. We now need to repeat the same test to confirm that port 5001 is also open. Finally, to confirm that the firewall on our NAS has closed all other ports, if we once again use the same command, but this time test a port that we expect to be closed. After a short delay, we should receive confirmation that the port is actually closed. Let's return to DStation Manager and continue to configure our firewall. If you find that you can no longer access DStation Manager, in the address bar of your browser, try typing the IP address of your NAS followed by a colon and then the port number 5000. If you still cannot access DStation Manager, more than likely you left the Deny All rule above the Management UI rule. So basically, you've now locked yourself out of your NAS. In order to get around this problem, you now need to perform a Mode 1 reset, which will disable the firewall without deleting any of your data or the services that you have running. As we now need to start opening ports on our firewall in order to allow specific services to run, let's start by re-enabling SMB file sharing. Let's create a new rule by once again selecting Create and then using the option Select from a list of built-in applications. After clicking on the Select button, the first service we need to open is WDS Discovery, which uses port 5357 and port 3702. Web Service Dynamic Discovery is a protocol that allows services to be detected over a local network. So while it's not something that we need to enable, it does allow Windows and Apple Macintosh computers to more easily browse for printers or network shares on our NAS. After ticking both WS Discovery options, we're going to select OK. Another useful security feature of our firewall is that we can limit access to our NAS by either a device's IP address or its location. So for something like network shares, where we might only want devices on our home network to be able to access them, we can use the settings specific IP. If we now click Select, we can choose how our NAS will determine if a device can access our network shares. This can be either via a single IP address, a network subnet, or the option that we're going to use, an IP range. As we only want specific devices to access our network shares, if we use the same IP range as that being used by the DHCP server on our home network, for this rule, our firewall will only accept connections from devices on our home network. After clicking OK, the action for this rule will need to be left on Allow. When we click OK for a second time, we will have created another rule for our firewall. We now need to make sure that our new rule works by placing it above the Deny All rule. While we now have a new rule that allows us to browse network services provided by our NAS, the SMB network shares that we've already created are still being blocked by our firewall. So rather than create a new rule for our network shares and make our list of rules confusing to manage, it makes sense to group everything to do with network shares into a single rule. If we highlight the rule that we just created and select the Edit button, we can add additional services to this rule by once again clicking Select from a list of built-in applications. We now need to locate and tick Windows File Server. By clicking OK, our rule is updated so that it will allow traffic for ports 137, 138, 139, and 445 into and out of our NAS. Let's create a new rule so that the media services on our NAS will work. If we click on Create, then in the Create Firewall Rule panel, we once again choose Select from a list of built-in applications. We now need to search through the list and find any media services that we've already installed on our NAS. In this example, that includes Synology Photos, WebStation, and WebStation. It's worth noting that on later versions of DStation Manager, WebStation is no longer available, so you will not find a WebStation option in built-in applications. Instead, if you've already installed a third-party video streaming service like Jellyfin or Plex, you will need to create a custom rule for your firewall. While we will be looking at creating a custom rule in a moment, that rule will be related to making our NAS respond to a ping. So if you're using a third-party video streaming service, you will need to adapt what we are about to take a look at in order to create your custom rule. After clicking OK, we're going to leave source IP and actions on their default settings. The reason we did not change the source IP is because in the future we might want to access our media services over the internet, which, because we've not yet set up remote access or tested that these media services will work through our firewall settings, we could make troubleshooting more difficult. So for now, we're simply going to leave source IP on all, as we can always go back and change this rule in the future. Let's click OK and position our new rule above our Deny All rule. Since we're the administrator of our NAS, it can be handy to be able to check to see if it's online. However, because we've enabled the firewall on our NAS is no longer responding to pings. Luckily, this problem gives us an opportunity to take a look at how we create a custom rule, something that you will need to know if you're planning to install a third-party service like Jellyfin on your NAS. Let's start by clicking on Create to add a new rule. If we choose Custom, we can set if we want to choose a destination or source port, choose which protocols our custom rule will use, and either manually give our rule a set of non-sequential port numbers or assign it with a range of port numbers. For this example, as we only want our NAS to respond to pings, our custom rule will be very simple, as we only need to enable something called Internet Control Message Protocol. After choosing ICMP, as we do not need to set any port numbers, we can click OK and set our source IP. As by default our source IP is set to all, our NAS will accept requests from any network address. However, for something like a ping request, we may not want our NAS to respond to pings from all IP addresses. So instead, we're going to have our NAS only respond to pings from devices on our home network. After clicking OK, we can set an action for this rule, which for this example, we will leave on Allow. When we select OK, our new rule is added to our list of rules, which we now need to place above the Deny All rule. When we click OK, the list of rules for our firewall are updated. We can now test that our new rules are working, so let's start by trying to ping our NAS. Regardless of whether you're using Windows, Linux or Mac OS, if we open a terminal window and then at the command prompt type ping followed by the IP address of your NAS, When you press enter on your keyboard, you should see that your NAS is responding to your computer's ping requests. It's worth noting that Windows by default will only make 4 ping requests, at which point you can close the terminal window. However, if you're running a ping through macOS, it will continue to make ping requests until you either hold down Control and press C on your keyboard or close the terminal window. We now need to test that we can still access our network shares. On Windows, if we simply open File Explorer and then browse our network, we should find our NAS, which when we double-click it will display our network shares. On macOS, we should be able to connect to the shares on our NAS by selecting Go from the menu bar of Finder and choosing Connect to Server. While Connect to Server will work in macOS, if we open Finder and then try and browse for our NAS, it will not be present, which is because macOS uses a protocol called Bonjour in order to see network services. If we return to DSM7 Manager and once again open Control Panel, then from within Control Panel we choose Security and select the Firewall tab. By clicking Edit Rules, we can add a rule for the Bonjour protocol. While we could add the Bonjour rule to the rule that we already have for network sharing, as Windows users don't need to have this rule enabled, we're going to create a new rule just for Bonjour. That way, if in the future we no longer have Apple Macintosh computers connected to our home network, we can easily see the rule for Bonjour and disable it in order to protect port 5353. Let's click Create and select Bonjour from the list of built-in applications. In source IP, as the Bonjour protocol is not able to travel over VPN connections, we're going to set source IP to the IP range of our home network. After clicking OK, and then OK again to create a new rule, we need to move our new Bonjour rule so that it is above the Deny All rule. Finally, if we click OK, we will update our firewall rules. Now if we return to macOS and open Finder, we should find that we're now able to browse our network shares. In order to test the rules for any media services that we may have running on our NAS, we simply need to try and open the sign-in page to that service. So for example, while we already know that we can access the sign-in page for DSM7 Manager by typing into the address bar of our browser the IP address of our NAS, followed by a colon and the port number 5000, we now need to check we can access the sign-in page for Audio Station by using the port number 8800, and then check that we can access Synology Photos by using the port number 5080. Any other services that you may have running on your NAS will now also need to be tested, and where necessary a new rule added to your firewall. However, we do have a problem. If we type the IP address of our NAS into our browser, or try and use an alias for one of the services that we previously configured, we will only get a message informing us that the connection has timed out. The reason this happens is because our NAS is using web technology from its built-in web server that is currently being blocked by our firewall. So to fix this problem, we're going to need to return to DSM7 Manager and create a new firewall rule for WebStation. If we once again open Control Panel and then select Security, then Firewall, if we edit our rules and then create a new rule, once again we can use the Select from a list of built-in applications and locate the WebStation and webmail ports. After ticking both port 80 and 443, then clicking OK, we're going to leave the source IP on all and set the action to allow. After clicking OK, we need to set the position of our new rule so that it is above our deny all rule. Finally, by once again clicking OK, we can update our firewall rules. If we return to testing that we can access services running on our NAS, now when we type the IP address of our NAS into the address bar of a browser, we should find that when we press enter on our keyboard, we're automatically taken to the sign-in page for DSM7 Manager. You should also find that when you test any aliases, that they also now work. It's worth noting that if you make a mistake configuring your firewall and lock yourself out of your NAS, you can perform a Mode 1 soft reset, which is a process that will not delete any applications or data from your NAS, but will disable the firewall. We would also like to point out that with our firewall now enabled, any time that we add a new service through Package Center, we will be prompted to enable a new rule for our firewall. However, if in the future we start to work with Docker and containers, we will need to manually create custom firewall rules for those containers. Something we hope you should find a little easier now that you've seen how to create and work with firewall rules. Finally, after finishing any work relating to our firewalls, we always like to rerun Shields Up to check that any additions, changes or tweaks that we've made have not inadvertently opened a port and exposed our home network to the internet. So to summarize, in this video, we took a look at how you enable and configure the firewall on a Synology NAS. We did this by first creating a rule that blocks all traffic into and out of our NAS. We then created a rule that allows us to access DSM7 Manager. Next, we took a look at creating a group of rules to allow file sharing before setting up a rule to allow us to access media services on our NAS. We finished up by creating a custom rule and looking at setting rules that will only work with specific sources. Finally, we tested that our new firewall rules actually work and provided you with some tips that include what to do if you should lock yourself out of your NAS.